as usual, inspiring, substantive, with absolute excellent proposals, and I agree with everything you said. The only thing lacking in your presentation, as well as His Holiness Pope Francis, was humor. There was inspiration, substantive policies, outstanding analysis, but the perspective of humor was lacking, so I'm going to begin with a little story. There's a guy that I work with in my office, and every day he comes in with a tuna fish sandwich. And I said, Charles, why do you really like tuna fish that much? He said, no, I hate it. Every day, tuna fish salad, or tuna fish teriyaki, or grilled tuna. Every day I had tuna fish, tuna fish, tuna fish. I hate it. I said, well, why don't you tell your wife, make something different for you? He said, oh, you know I'm not married. I do it myself. When you look at the litany of issues that His Holiness Pope Francis laid out, all of them are within our hands. All of them are tuna fish salad sandwiches that we are making every day ourselves, and now for no good reason. But he places them in the context of moral imperatives. So I wanted to begin with one of the points that he made that I thought was truly extraordinary, and I'll quote from the Pope's speech at the United Nations. First, it must be stated that a true, and he quotes, right of the environment does exist for two reasons. First, because we human beings are part of the environment. We live in communion with it, since the environment itself entails ethical limits which human activity must acknowledge and respect. And he highlights that we are not authorized to abuse it, much less to destroy it. In all religions, the environment is a fundamental good. And that reminded me of the statement that he made in Laudato Si, his powerful encyclical, which I commend to everyone's attention. It is multi-level, uplifting in its poetry, profound in its philosophy. And he sympathetically quotes his colleague in devotion and faith, Patriarch Bartholomew, which in itself is fairly progressive, to say the least, healing wounds in the ecumenical community of those who are following the faith of Jesus. He quotes, for human beings to destroy the biological diversity of God's creation, for human beings to degrade the integrity of the earth by causing changes in its climate, by stripping the earth of its natural forests, or destroying its wetlands, for human beings to contaminate the earth's waters, its land, its air, and its life, these are sins. For to commit a crime against the natural world is a sin against ourselves and a sin against God. In other words, it's not a utilitarian argument. It's a moral imperative that he's putting before us. And the greatest threat to our environment, according to the World Commission on the Environment and Development, they stated it quite bluntly. The likely consequences of nuclear war make other threats to the environment pale in insignificance. Nuclear weapons represent a qualitatively new step in the development of warfare. One thermonuclear bomb can have an explosive power greater than all the explosives used in wars since the invention of gunpowder. In addition to the destructive effects of blast and heat, immensely magnified by these weapons, they introduce a new lethal agent, ionizing radiation, that extends lethal effects over both time and space. And as General Lee Butler, who was head of the Strategic Command of the United States, expressed a growing alarm that despite all the evidence, we have yet to fully grasp the monstrous effect of these weapons, that the consequence of their use defy reason, transcending time and space, poisoning the earth, deforming its inhabitants. His Holiness Pope Francis continued in his speech, creation is compromised where we ourselves have the final word. The misuse of creation begins when we no longer recognize any instance above ourselves, when we see nothing but ourselves. And that reminded me of George Kennan's quote, the distinguished American diplomat who originated the Cold War containment policy of the Soviet Union, on the issue of our proportionality, our sense of where we are in the universe, our right to do things, a sense of limitation and law, not positive law, but natural law, human law, spiritual law, the law of being human. The readiness to use nuclear weapons against other human beings, against people we do not know, whom we've never seen, and whose guilt or innocence is not for us to establish, and in doing so to place in jeopardy the natural structure upon which all civilization rests, as though the safety and perceived interests of our own generation were more important than everything that has taken place or could take place in civilization, this is nothing less than a presumption, a blasphemy, an indignation, an indignity of monstrous dimensions offered up to God. His Holiness addressed nuclear weapons squarely at the United Nations. He said an ethics and a law based on the threat of mutual destruction and possibly the destruction of all mankind are self-contradictory and an affront to the entire framework of the United Nations, which would end up as nations united by fear and distrust. There is an urgent, I emphasize that, an urgent need to work for a world free of nuclear weapons in full application of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in letter and spirit with the goal of the complete prohibition of these weapons. The appeal to the moral conscience of man has never been as necessary today. So you see, he appeals both to the legal requirement of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and our moral sensibility. He doesn't, and he puts the two together, and he approaches it both practically as well. And this reminded me of the logic of the Holy See's outstanding paper called Nuclear Disarmament, Time for Abolition, in which the Holy See essentially deconstructs the logic of deterrence. You see, the position until this paper, which was released last December, has been essentially nuclear weapons are terrible, but there's a qualified legitimacy to deterrence to prevent them from being used without a deep analysis of what deterrence rests upon. But the Holy See's new analysis argues that rather than providing security as the defendants of deterrence contend, reliance on a strategy of nuclear deterrence has created a less secure world. And the reason is that it severs human solidarity that's so necessary for dealing with the whole range of global issues. But moreover, in order for deterrence to work, there must be a credible preparedness to annihilate everything, which means, and I quote, the language of, you must have people demonstrably ready and having the intent to use the weapons. Otherwise, deterrence doesn't work. So, the language of intention obscures the fact that nuclear armories, as the instruments of military strategy, inherently bear active disposition for use. Nuclear weaponry does not simply lie dormant until the conditional intention is converted into an actual one at the moment when a nuclear attack is launched by one's adversary. The machinery of nuclear deterrence does not work that way. It involves a whole set of acts that are predisposed to use: strategic designs, targeting plans, training drills, readiness checks, alerts, screening for conscientious objectors among operators, and so on. Not to mention the cost. The United States just pledged $1 trillion to get the START treaty out of committee with no public debate. Not to mention the moral cost. I was reminded of a few years ago, over 100 missileers were dismissed because of their moral turpitude issue. They had cheated on an exam. Well, what was the exam about? The exam was to show their readiness to annihilate everything, to end history, to make life extinct. That was what they were being tested on. Well, they didn't get fired for questioning the legitimacy of extinction. They got fired because they cheated. They were immoral. And the Pope, the Holy See continues here. World leaders must be reminded that the commitment to disarm embodied in the NPT and other international documents is more than a legal political detail. It is a moral commitment on which the future of the world depends. Pacta sunt servanda, treaties must be observed, is a first principle of the international system, and it is a foundation upon which trust can be built. If in the most important existential threat that humanity is faced with, if we don't adhere to promises that are made, then how can we expect adherence in less important matters? And if we take language in treaties with a cynical disregard for their integrity and their power, we're left purely with the law of power. We degrade the power of law at our peril. Specifically addressing the UN, the paper says, at the General Assembly last September, Archbishop Dominique Mamberti endorsed the Secretary General's 5-point plan for nuclear disarmament and called for a worldwide conference to draw up a convention on abolition. The Holy See, a convention would be in the way we have a convention banning biological weapons, in the way we have a convention banning chemical weapons. We need a convention banning nuclear weapons. And there is one in existence that the Secretary General has circulated that has enormous support. But the countries with nuclear weapons are blocking it. They're blocking movement on this. The Holy See, he explained in another talk, shares the thoughts and sentiments of most men and women of goodwill who aspire to the elimination of nuclear weapons. Now is the time to affirm not only the immorality of the use of nuclear weapons, but the immorality of their possession, thereby clearing the road to abolition. Because the possession is justified by the doctrine of deterrence, but deterrence rests on the readiness to use the weapons, which cannot be morally justified. And that is new. And that is something that the Secretary General powerfully brought before the world community that I think is extremely important and creates the political space where diplomats and citizens can stand up and say, it's time for change. It's no longer business as usual. There's now a practical necessity, a moral call, and a program to get us there. The Secretary General's 5-point plan is outstanding. His Holiness has clearly stated this is the roadmap. What we don't have is public knowledge, even of this part of his speech. So I would urge all of us to take it upon ourselves, whatever faith tradition we're in, to demand that this be made public, especially in the Holy See's realm, where there can be huge influence. The Holy See was instrumental in helping us obtain the Chemical Weapons Convention. They were instrumental in that in the United States. I don't know about the rest of the world, but they were definitely instrumental here. And now that His Holiness Pope Francis has opened up this political space, I feel we need to seize it. And I want to end by just highlighting some of the context of his speech, because he had just come back from the Congress where he had mentioned 4 great abolitionists. First, Abraham Lincoln. Well, they didn't have nukes then. He would have abolished them, I'm sure. But the other three were, 1, Dorothy Day. Not very well known, but you know what she did? In 1955, the state of New York, in compliance with a national policy, ordered that we would have public exercises to prepare for a nuclear attack, which meant that people scurried into subways and basements, that students did duck and cover. I think some of us here are old enough to remember that we were told if you hid under your desk and put your hands like this, don't look up because you could get blinded. But you didn't mention you just get evaporated. But duck and cover. And so Dorothy thought this was ridiculous. This very brilliant lady, courageous lady, founder of the Catholic Worker. So she went and sat in front of City Hall with some of her friends and publicly said to the press, if we depend on atomic bombs, it's evidence that we don't have faith in God. That was one of the people that he highlighted. The other person he highlighted was Thomas Merton. Well, Thomas Merton wrote this wonderful essay that I read when I was in college, in which he talked about the banality of evil of Adolf Eichmann. and that he'd been Adolf Eichmann, who was instrumental in the annihilation of millions of Jews during World War II, and that Adolf Eichmann had been evaluated by psychiatrists and declared him sane, and that a man could be declared sane who could callously disregard the well-being of so many people. And then Thomas Burton said, if he's sane, I want to be crazy. And he wrote a fabulous poem called The Original Child Bomb, and I'm only going to read a few little lines from it, in 1961. And I'm directly quoting Thomas Burton, who was not cited for his teaching on nuclear abolition by any of the press, after the Pope's speech. But this is what he said. In the year 1945, an original child was born. The name original child was given to it by the Japanese people, who recognized that it was the first of its kind. About 1 hour after Mr. Truman became president, his aides told him about a new bomb which was being developed by atomic scientists. One of those present added in a reverent tone that the new explosive might eventually destroy the whole world. But Admiral Leahy told the president the bomb won't ever work. President Truman formed a committee of men to tell him if this bomb would work, and if so, what he should do with it. At 8:09 a.m., they reached Hiroshima and started the bomb run. The city was full of sun. The flyers could see the green grass in the gardens. No fighters rose up to meet them. There was no flak. No one in the city bothered to take cover. The bomb exploded within 100 feet of the aiming point. The fireball was 18,000 feet across. The temperature at the center of the fireball was 100 million degrees. The people who were near the center became nothing. The whole city was blown to bits, and the ruins all caught fire instantly everywhere, burning briskly. 70,000 people were killed right away or died within a few hours. Those who did not die at once suffered great pain. Few of them were soldiers. The men in the plane perceived that the raid had been successful, but they thought of the people in the city, and they weren't perfectly happy. Some felt they'd done wrong. But in any case, they had obeyed orders. It was war. Over the radio went the code message that the bomb had been successful. Visible effects greater than Trinity. Proceed to Papacy. Papacy was the code name for Tinian, the island that they had taken off from. It took a little while for the rest of Japan to find out. A 4-line item in the news said that Hiroshima had been hit by an incendiary bomb and added, it seems that some damage was caused to the city and its vicinity. Then the military governor of the prefecture of Hiroshima issued a proclamation full of martial spirit to all the people without hands, without feet, with their faces falling off, with their intestines hanging out, with their whole bodies full of radiation. He declared to them, we must not rest a single day in our war effort. We must bear in mind that the annihilation of the stubborn enemy is our road to revenge. He was a professional soldier. As to the original child that was now born, President Truman summed up his philosophy. We found the bomb, we used it. Since that summer, many other bombs have been found. What is going to happen? At the time of writing, after a season of brisk speculation, men seem fatigued with the whole question. And Martin Luther King, when he received the Nobel Prize, said, recent events have vividly reminded us that nations are not reducing but rather increasing their arsenals of weapons of mass destruction. The best brains in the highly developed nations of the world are devoted to military technology. The proliferation of nuclear weapons has not been halted. The fact that most of the time human beings put the truth about the nature and risks of nuclear war out of their minds because it's too painful and therefore not acceptable does not alter the nature and risks of such war. The device of rejection may temporarily cover up anxiety, but it does not bestow peace of mind and emotional security. And I further quote, it is necessary to love peace and sacrifice for it. We've inherited a huge house in which we must all live together. And I will end with quotes from him. I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into the hell of nuclear annihilation. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. And that I believe, in sum, is the Pope's message to us, that the unconditional love upon which the Holy See rests is something that we have to bring into force. We have to have faith in that, and we must bring this message up the political ladder. Diplomats must push it up the political ladder, and we must push it out to the public. Thank you.